So we'll start with you. Why are you running for office, and why do you think you're the best candidate?
Sure.
3 minutes.
So, like I said, my name is Janjigian. I'm actually I'm running for office just because I've been working in healthcare for about 15 years now, and the process in which I've been working is a little bit different. I own a variety of insurance agencies that kind of range from, I've got offices up in Washington, Arizona, and all over Texas. But it puts me in a very unique position. The insurance that we do is really focused on what we call supplemental insurance, which deals with cancer, heart, accidents. And because I'm on that side of it and I understand how the insurance system works, I've also been very, very involved on the claims side. And that's put me in a unique position to work with folks that are going through major healthcare issues. So it's not just being from the inside of healthcare as a doctor, like Christina's, for example, but it's being in a position where you're actually dealing with people trying to get the funds necessary to be able to take care of that. And I've had, over 15 years, I've had hundreds of claims I've dealt with where I've had families that have done everything right? They had the right Blue Cross Blue Shield plan or Scott and White plan or whatever. A lot of my clients are military as well. And we do a lot of work with military. A lot of the folks that are in Killeen are clients of ours. And you find that they did everything right, they had the right insurance, but they've still had to go through bankruptcy. They've still had to lose their homes or properties, because if you can't work for 6 months to a year, even if you've got great insurance, how do you take care of your mortgage, right? How do you take care of your day-to-day bills? If you've got kids in school, how do you get them watched if you're going through and struggling with something like a major disease like that? And it really exposed me. I mean, from what I do, it's always been great to work one-on-one with folks and find ways to help them and protect them, because our company gives money to folks to help them with that. But it became clear that I didn't want my kids to inherit these same kind of issues, and we've been talking about healthcare for so many years in this country. I wanted to be part of that national discussion, because I don't think there's many people that understand it in the way that I do, to the degree that I do, that are running in any congressional district, and that is a national issue. That was probably the first thing, and the other unique thing about my business is that the way that we work, I don't have people come into my office when we sign up a new client. I've sat down with over 18,000 different Texans in their homes, face to face, across the table, and this is way before I ever got involved in exploring politics. But having those discussions with them, not just about their health care, but what they deal with when the oil and gas goes up or down in the country, how that affects them, and just understanding those things that they go through. That's really what kind of prompted me to get in from that angle. The ironic thing is, what really got me involved in the race, and I just kind of decided now I've got to make this move, was some of the rules that just passed and some of the legislation that passed last year as far as LGBT. I have friends in that community. They were affected and in a very negative way when, for example, that House rule came out about you could be fired if you were recognized by your employer as being LGBTQ. And that to me was such a civil rights violation that's really kind of what prompted me in. But it was all based on healthcare.
Christine?
I have been a family practice doctor for 20 years. I've trained and worked in the healthcare field for 30 years. Not only have I had the direct patient experience of dealing with people who were unable to manage their healthcare needs and the bills that went along with that, I ran a healthcare business for 11 years. I was the owner of a family practice in Round Rock. And during that time, I saw the administrative side of things very clearly. I contracted with every major insurance provider available, including TRICARE, Medicaid, Champus, CHIP, and all of the major health insurance companies. I negotiated contracts with insurance companies. I have worked with pharmaceutical companies, working to make sure patients were able to get the medications that they need. So I've been not just a one-on-one person with a patient. I have also done the business side of medicine, where I was negotiating with the major players, Blue Cross and United Healthcare, Aetna, all of those companies for 11 years. I did that piece of it. Beyond that, I've spent the last 20 years as an activist and a community organizer. I started working on public policy from the minute that I moved into Texas, 31, I started working with the Round Rock City Council to enact public policy to benefit the public. I then worked with the Williamson County American Heart Association. I was on the board of directors and worked with them. Then I worked to try and pressure the Texas Medical Association to support universal health care. That was starting in 2009. I have been active in the local community with sitting on the Georgetown Community Forum, where I bring Democrats and Republicans together to talk about important issues for the community. I put together a bipartisan panel on rape and rape kits in our district. And when I was working with the Round Rock City Council, that was a Republican mayor and a Republican city council. So I have broad experience for 2 decades of working with people across the aisle. Beyond that, I have put together a campaign that is set to win. I've got a staff that have worked on 37 different congressional political campaigns. I've been involved in politics since Obama ran the first time. I helped run a winning campaign in Georgetown, Red Georgetown. We won by 50 points. And I've raised more money than any Democrat has ever raised in this district in the year before an election. So I've got a huge team. We've got over 100 volunteers already on the ground working. So my public policy skills, my medical skills, plus my political skills combined are going to help me win the seat.
I'll start with you and go the other
Yeah,
direction.
sure.
So both of you agree that, both of you support expanding access to health care.
Mm-hmm.
But contrast your positions a little bit. How would you what would you support in order to make that happen if you were elected?
Sure. I have been advocating for universal health care since 2009. This is not a new policy for me. It's not a new position for me. I've written extensively on social media over the years. When I say universal coverage, what I mean is that you should be covered from birth to death without gaps for pre-existing conditions, for job loss, for moving to a different location. There should never be a gap in your coverage. No one should ever have to look at their bank account and see if they can afford to call EMS, which is where some of the rhetoric comes in on affordable health care. I don't check my bank account before I call the fire department in an emergency. No one should be checking their bank account when they are looking to go to the emergency room. So I chafe a little bit at the word affordable, because it shouldn't be something you have to think about whether or not you can afford. So in terms of how we do it, my plan is a little bit different than other plans that are out there. Number one, I'm not in favor of outlawing insurance companies. I believe that after we create a robust system for the American public, then if people still want to buy a plan above and beyond that, let the insurance companies make their cases that they have a product that they've been telling us for decades is so amazing. Let them make that case for their product so that people could buy that if they wanted to. But what I would do is initially shore up the ACA, make sure the subsidies are fully funded, make sure that we can get Medicaid expansion in as many states as possible. And I've actually worked on that issue here in Texas at the state legislature with John Busey's office. Make sure that people who need health care right now can get it. And then we do a transition to what I think is the best model is a single payer model. We drop the Medicare eligibility age to 55. We enroll every child when they are born, and then we keep dropping and we keep growing until we meet in the middle. Now, I would also change the rhetoric on this. We should be talking about this as the Healthcare Freedom and Security Act. because that is what this provides. You have the freedom to go to any provider that you want to, any hospital that you want to when you need to, and you have the security of knowing that healthcare is there for you whenever you need it. So I think that beyond introducing a plan, we have to change the way that we talk about it, and that's something that I've been really working hard on doing.
You know, it's funny, on Saturday night this week, Christine and I were both given the opportunity with the other candidates to do a forum in Round Rock, and it was a 4-hour debate. And one of the things that I loved about it is you kind of see where you are in general lined up with other folks. And I loved Christine's answer, because one of the things I learned on that night was, and on that night I got a chance to go first actually on this question, and we're very much on the same page with this. I've always had I had the opportunity for years. I was a bobsledder for 10 years and got a chance to compete, you know, around the world, and that exposed me to how healthcare was taken care of really in different areas. I had a very good friend of mine, for example, we were in Switzerland, and he had a horrible head injury from a bobsledding crash. Ultimately ended up having to go into an induced coma, and then they life flighted him back to the United States. But the way that it was handled was, you know, here's a guy that didn't live there, wasn't put up in there, was given no bill for any of that. You know, it was taken care of because that's part of what is allowed in a single payer system out there. And you learn that, you know, we always hear these stories about, well, there's these long wait times and, you know, all these things that go along with that. But the reality is those long wait times are for people that don't have an immediate need. You know, if you need an MRI because you want to get a shoulder surgery that may not be a life-threatening case, that MRI is going to go to somebody who has to get something done immediately first. And the single-payer system to me is a fantastic system, because if you look at, I always kind of make the analogy of how our school systems are handled, right? If you're a child here between the ages of 5 and 18, you are entitled to get a certain amount of education. And as a citizen of this country, if I want to get private school, or if I want to homeschool my kids, or if I want to take them to a special tutor, I have that right. If I want to spend extra, I can. But at the end of the day, everybody has a basic level of schooling that they're allowed. And the same thing should be true with healthcare. Every single person, as Christine said, from the day you're born to the day you die, should have that made available to them. But there's going to be a transition, right? Those things aren't going to happen overnight. You know, to take insurance companies and think that they're going to suddenly disappear is not going to happen. So in the beginning, you've got to allow that and make something that's available to everyone, but still give people the right to keep the plans that they want to keep. You know, if they love their insurance, which some people do, if they love what they currently have, keep that. But I think what you're going to find is that as that public option gets better and better and better as time goes on, and as they have more access and can go see who they want to see when they want to see them, you know, I always make the joke, Kodak doesn't exist anymore for a reason, right? You're going to see that a lot of those insurance companies, I think, will finally kind of end up going away, just because within our healthcare system they're going to become archaic.
Talk a little bit about, we'll start with you, about immigration and border security. What do you support there, and how do we address that issue?
So I talked at length about this last night. This is a big one for me. I'm first generation Armenian, and I'm sure you guys know, since you're in the news, you know, we finally, after 104 years, had the Armenian Genocide just recognized in November and December, respectively, by the House and Senate. This is very, very personal to me, because my grandmother, who escaped that genocide and escaped here, she saw her father was killed, her mother and sister were drowned, thrown off a bridge, and she was able to escape here with her other brother. And she had a path to citizenship that allowed her to come here, start a life here, and if she came here now, today, she'd probably be in a detention center somewhere waiting for her case to come up. And I can't imagine the folks that are going through that today and what they have to go through. And so immigration has always been a really, really big thing for me, because I don't believe that anybody, most Democrats that you talk to are not going to give you the Republican line that we all want to see these open borders. Yeah, just come and go as you please. But there has to be a path to immigration, especially for people that are trying to escape genocide, people that are looking for, to be saved from the lands they came from. It's the only thing they've ever known. There has to be a path that allows them to have a safe haven to come through. And you see that a lot in Europe. Now in the United States, we've really kind of locked that down, and that's not the country that my grandparents originally came to. And I think that's the first thing that has to happen is creating a path that allows people to come through, but still includes the vetting. I mean, we have to be conscientious of the safety of the people that surround us, but you've got to take care of the people that need to be taken care of. And I think, and I apologize, I think your question is a little bit more broad than just that. I want to make sure I don't leave anything out.
Well, you addressed border security and immigration. On border security, do you support a border wall?
No, I don't. I don't believe that spending tens of billions of dollars on a wall. I mean, unless you're going to put that wall 200 feet high and 200 feet deep, where it can't be tunneled under, and do a lot better than the slats that we currently have in there. I don't think a border wall at all solves the issue, because the people that are breaking in that we're most worried about are coming through really where our legal entries are. They're just finding ways to get around that. It's not as much the folks that are trying to come over the border through some of those other areas. I mean, there's always going to be people that are finding effective ways, I guess, to bring through drugs and other things that we want to keep out of the country. But at the end of the day, it's legal border crossings that we're worried about, and finding, again, a vetting process that's going to be a little bit more clear and concise to make sure that we're having the people in that really deserve to be here.
Same question, Dr. Mann.
I've been working on this issue for a while through multiple channels. I started working with grassroots leadership a couple of years ago, trying to bring to light the issues regarding people who are in Teton Hutto detention center in our district. And there were credible reports of abuse by guards specific to a couple of women who were there. And so I went and visited with one of the women who was there. I participated in some protests to try and bring light to what was going on. And those protests ultimately were successful in having the Williamson County Commissioner's Court try and end their contract with Teton Hutto. Now, there's been some things happen since then, and the contract hasn't completely ended yet, but the group was successful in getting that onto the agenda and having the Commissioner's Court weigh in on it. More recently, I was at the border in Laredo, volunteering at a clinic and shelter for people who were seeking asylum. They had come up through Central America, through Mexico, had been detained by CBP, and then were being initially sent to stay with people in the country who would sponsor them. But that was when the MPP policy went into place. It was the week that I was there, and people stopped coming to our shelter, and we didn't know what was happening to them. So I traveled into Nuevo Laredo to try and track down what was happening with the immigrants who were coming up through Mexico. And we found what everyone has seen, people sleeping on pizza boxes and pregnant women sitting on the side of the street. And it deteriorated from there. And if I had a whole lot more time, I would tell you all of the other things that we learned. And I've written about it. It's another thing you can find on my website. So I've been working with a group of physicians, nationwide group of physicians called Doctors for Camp Closure. We are also working to close the detention camps. We raised enough money to give flu vaccines to migrants who were in detention in California. We were denied entry to be able to do that. And I'm traveling next week to DC to participate in some more work on trying to get the detention centers closed. And then I'm also working with a nationwide consortium of nonprofits who are trying to maintain infrastructure for asylum seekers in the United States. As the current administration has dropped down the number of asylum seekers allowed into the country, the infrastructure to support those asylum seekers has disintegrated. So we're working at the state level to try and maintain that. Now, to bring it all back together about your question, if you've been to the border lately, it is a military zone. There is border security right now. We need a wall. People who are seeking asylum from outside of the country are the most vetted people ever. They go through 7 different agencies and years of vetting before they come in. We should be increasing the number of people that we let in. We can afford it. We should do it. No border wall.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
We could just do 2 minutes on this one.
Yeah.
We'll start with you. But, I started covering immigration in about 2003, and pretty much the same issues exist now that did then. Nothing gets done in Congress.
Yeah.
Realistically, how could a freshman member of Congress get things done, and how would you do it on this issue?
Yeah, and I will tell you on this issue, and I'll tell you that it applies to many issues. It's not, no one thinks that we're going to walk in and wave a magic wand and get all of this stuff done, but that's not an argument for not trying. We have to hold the line with where we are now, and then we start to influence people through our voices and our platforms. Education is so important to what we do. Persuasion is so important to what we do. And that's how I've always operated when I work on public policy, is I enter the negotiations with the knowledge that what I have on my side is correct, and a firm recognition that I'm fighting for human rights when I do these things. And I tell people why. And it's interesting on immigration. If you go to the George W. Bush website, he has a section on immigration where he talks about the benefits of immigration to this country in terms of the economic growth, in terms of the human growth, in terms of things like shoring up Social Security. We know that if we bring more immigrants in, we pay into Social Security to help sustain Social Security. So these things are interconnected. So when I'm talking to people who disagree with me, I bring up George Bush, and I say, even George Bush said, this is something that we should be improving on. This is something that we should be strengthening, not something that we should be afraid of. So as a freshman, that's how I would continue that process. One is getting elected is a big piece of it. When we create a wall of people who say we're not going to continue down the path that we're doing, and we build on that wall, we have a platform to be able to get that information out into the public and to engage people who may be on the fence about it, that we just need to bring into our side.
Same question.
One, I love the fact that you asked this question because I really honestly think the biggest breakage that we have in politics today is the fact that 70% of the country sees itself as kind of more in the middle. We're becoming purple as a country right now. You've got people that kind of feel a little bit this way, a little bit that way. But then when you look at our politics, it's very disjointed, right? You have people that are very far left, very far right, and it becomes a question of who's got the most seats. And then, of course, when the next administration comes, it flips, and then they get rid of all the work that was done the first time. So it's just this horrible recurring cycle. There's a great book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. And it's not a political book, but if you read it, one of the things that Simon talks about is he said, 30 years ago, congressmen used to live in D.C. and they would travel to their district, and now it's the opposite. And the beauty of that was you'd have these folks that were, they had their kids going to school together, they'd go to church together, they'd be at civic activities together. And so even if they didn't agree on legislation, there was a mutual respect that happened because they had those relationships. And one of the things that we've been doing is we've already been building those relationships now, because as a freshman congressman, I think the greatest thing you can do is have those relationships built and not just start those relationships when you are at the table. It's too late at that point, right? You've got to be able to sit with people. And my entire life, everything I've done since I started in sales in 1990, wow, time flies, is we've been putting together deals with people that definitely wanted to kind of gain whatever they wanted to gain from their side, and we were on the opposite side, and it was always about getting people to come to a mutual agreement that would benefit everybody. And I believe, really sincerely, that is the biggest thing that's missing, not just in Congress, but in the Senate and politics in general today. So it's about building those relationships and doing it early and strengthening them so that you have people that can at least talk with a mutual respect, even if they don't necessarily agree. And when it comes to immigration or any other thing that we talk about today, one, that's going to be probably one of the key components that I'll come back to, because it's the only way that you can move things forward in a really good way.
Another two-minute question. We'll start with you. The district you're seeking was built to benefit Republicans.
Sure.
The last election was tight. What evidence do you see that your agenda and your message can resonate with Democratic voters?
So yeah, when MJ Hager ran last cycle, I mean, what a tight cycle, right? She did an unbelievable race, lost by less than 3%. And it's funny because you're starting to feel it more and more. People always talk about the fact that it's kind of becoming more of it's gone from red to purple, and it's really transitioning, I think, more from purple to blue. And the reason is because people are really getting tired of the gridlock that's been happening overall. I've got a lot of friends, just from the nature of what I do, a huge percentage of the people that I hang out with and I know and respect are, in a lot of cases, very staunchly Republican. You know, one of my best friends, who's an agency owner like me, you know, he's a big Trump supporter. You know, his dad, who I've had a chance to sit down and have long conversations with, runs the Anheuser-Busch Ranch just north of Austin, you know, in the district. But it's funny because they're all getting aggravated with the fact that they're understanding that things have to become more bipartisan, otherwise nothing's moving forward. And they don't want to continue to play defense when it comes to things like, you know, their rights to have guns or the things that are important to them as well. So, you know, moving forward, again, within the district, I think you're going to see that a lot of the conversations that are occurring, and again, I'll go back to the fact that I've had the opportunity to sit down with so many thousands of people one-on-one, has really opened up some conversations that have let me see what their thoughts are, as well as them understanding why, you know, the things that we believe are so strong. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, I don't know if he's an astrophysicist, and I love hearing him because he talks about the way he thinks. And, you know, he talks about cognitive bias. And, you know, one of the things I love is that he says, look, if you shut yourself off, you know, I can be very strong in my beliefs, but if I shut myself off and I don't listen to what your beliefs are, then I've created a box. And all I can do is live within that box, and it's really hard to get out, and it's really hard to get you out if we know that we're both staunchly set in what we believe. And I think you're seeing a lot more in the district now. People are opening themselves up to other thoughts and at least being open to seeing how they can find a really good medium.
Well, I've been working politics in this district for several years. I was there when Terry Cook won the first Democratic seat in 20 years. I was part of the Democratic Party at that point. Since then, I worked on Julie Nitsch's campaign, Sean Hassan's campaign, Heather Jeffs, Ann Duffy, Hilda Montgomery. I helped run Rachel Johnro's campaign, which again in a red district, Georgetown, we won by 50 points. Jaquita Wilson ran 2 times. We, in the last cycle, we won 2 JP seats. We won 2 Texas House seats. We've got city council members in both counties. And so the evidence is clearly there that this is trending away from being a solidly red district. Beyond that, I run a group called the Williamson County VDR Collective. I founded this group of volunteer voter registrars. I've been a volunteer registrar for over a decade. And I founded this group, and in Williamson County, we've already registered 6,500 voters. And that is above what the Texas Democratic Party has set as the target for registering new voters before the primary. Also, what we're watching is in Killeen, there is a brand new Democratic club. It just started in January of 2019. We've been working with them for the past year. And then we're also watching House District 28, where voter turnout in that race for this special election is 5 times higher for early voting than it has been in the past. So the trends are in not just our district, but also in Texas districts with these special elections. So it's a matter of getting people out. And we've been on the ground now for months, knocking on doors to make that happen, making phone calls.
Other questions?
I've been asking everybody, all the Democrats about, or actually all the congressional candidates, about impeachment. If you had been in Congress last fall, with the 2 articles as written, would you have voted for those? Would you have liked to have seen something more narrow, something more broad? What would have been your approach? And also, if you have time, how do you think the party has handled this overall? I'm not sure who gets to start this time?
I guess it's me because I went
Have at it.
second
You
last
went last time. There you go.
time.
Yes.
Throw you on the fire.
No, it's fine. I would have voted for articles of impeachment. I'm not thrilled with the way House Democrats have handled it. I have times where I think they're doing great and times where I think that they haven't been as aggressive as they could have been. We've had way too many subpoenas ignored. We've had way too many people who just are not willing to tell what they know. And that is, we have a situation where there's not going to be a standard for accountability anymore. I actually also think that there would be an opening for an impeachment based on the emoluments clause of the Constitution. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know every single piece of information that's out there, but I think it's something that should have been looked at, something that should have been investigated and included as a possible additional article of impeachment. I don't need 2 full minutes on that one.
I think this is really a tough question because it's kind of a little more three-dimensional. A lot of people look at this as a two-dimensional question, right? What does it buy us to impeach Donald Trump? And I think the question is important because we know how his base is, and we know that there's a lot of people that are fringe on his base. And I remember the first time people started talking about impeachment, which was after the whole Russia investigation. My answer was pretty simply, I'm like, I don't think it's worthwhile because we know he's not going to get impeached in the Senate. At least that's my personal opinion. So then what is the point of taking him through the impeachment with the House? Because the one thing that we know is going to happen in the case of taking, and has happened, is that he galvanizes his base. It's funny, most Democrats I talk to will tell me that they feel, and they hate to say it, and I hear it all the time, I hate to say it, but I think that, if Trump makes it through this impeachment, he's going to take he's going to win the next election pretty easily. And I keep hearing that from top Democrats. And the reason is because his base is so staunch, they're going to make sure they vote, they're going to make sure everybody they know votes. And so it's difficult. If the question is, do I think that what he does deserves him to be impeached from office, my answer would be yes. I think that he should be removed from office. I think it's pretty cut and dry. The whole way that that this trial is working out it's like a bunch of Keystone cops, running this whole thing. Having no witnesses, saying that they're going to be in line with the White House. All those things I've never seen anything like this so public. Usually those are said behind closed doors. Now it's just being said on CNN or, Fox News, and it's crazy to me. But at the end of the day, I hate to say it, I think that it's actually helping his opportunity to win this next election.
Can I have my minute back?
Sure.
I would like to address that. The reason you vote for impeachment is because of what the Constitution says, not about whether or not the politics of it or the optics of it are good. It's, and I'm on record on this previously, I got asked this question before, that you don't make a decision about voting for or against impeachment based on whether or not it's going to help Trump or hurt Trump's base or his election prospects or anything related to that, or whether it's going to be about your election prospects and your ability to keep your job. You vote on it based on the Constitution. And so anyone who is making a political calculation about whether or not to vote for impeachment is not doing their job as a congressperson.
Well, I've got to be able to throw a follow-up on that. The best thing I can say is that, unfortunately we are talking politics. It'd be great if everything was, again, two-dimensional. And we could just say, hey, this isn't something that we should take into account. But the bottom line is, I do agree. Congress, I mentioned what I would have done earlier with the Russia impeachment, right? I would definitely have supported impeachment and going through the House as we had to, because that is what your job is. But the problem is, at the end of the day, you have to look at it and say, well, what is this doing? Because at the end of the day, if you really believe that somebody has done something that deserves a certain action, I can get mad at my kids and say, look, they did something wrong, and I can punish them at different levels of punishment. But if that punishment doesn't get the long-term desired effect that I'm really trying to get with those kids, what have I done? And if you know that we have a Senate that's not going to do what they're supposed to do, even though it's your job to do something, sometimes you have to look and say, well, how does this affect the people that are that I'm really trying to protect, which in this case is the constituency of the United States, and is the long-term goal to make sure that this president doesn't get a second term, or is the long-term goal to say that we label him as being one of 3 presidents that was impeached in the history of the country? I mean, the second one's bad, but what's worse?
It's neither of those.
Yeah, there's no easy answer, and that's why this seat is such an important seat.
And you talked about sort of preemptively building relationships with people you might serve with. That's what you're saying. Are you literally talking about going to Washington or wherever and talking to people who are either members of Congress or going to be members of Congress or members of Congress about building a relationship at that level? Or are you talking more about talking to people in Texas who may support Trump?
No, members of Congress and the Senate actually. I've personally spoken to 2 senators in the last 2 months. We've reached out to several other ones. I'm pretty fortunate. I've got cousins and family that are in politics, have been for years. My cousin Arda Nazarian was kind of the right-hand man to Mario Cuomo when he was governor, and she's opened a huge amount of doors for us. Another cousin of mine in California is the director for the Central Coast for Dianne Feinstein, and so she's opened up doors to Dianne's office, to Senator Feinstein's office. We've reached out to a lot of folks on the congressional side as well, on both sides of the aisle, just to kind of start those relationships. Say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how what our goals are, if we're able to kind of get through the next level. And frankly, I think that's the most important thing, to be able to again start conversations and move things forward.
So you have talked to Republican members of Congress?
Yes and no. Ironically, my old company I work for, Southwestern Company, we actually had quite a few people that came out of that company that are now in Congress and we're connected with. For example, Ken Starr, believe it or not, used to work for my company. Jeff Sessions used to work for my company. Rick Perry used to work for my company, and we've got connections to them. Even Dave Rosen, who I spoke to this weekend, was the finance director for Hillary, and he's done Gray Davis's campaign. 26 years, he was one of the major. He was the lead finance director for them, and we had conversations with him this weekend, talking about, hey, if we are lucky enough to be the candidates that move beyond the primary, how are we going to raise the $6 or $7 million necessary to win the general and defeat John Carter? So we're reaching beyond what we're looking ahead to the next step, so that we can really be prepared and hopefully make some changes.
Is there a member of Congress currently who's a model for that kind of cross-partisan representation?
You're gonna laugh at me when I say this. Marsha Blackburn, who I know has just come out and done, she worked for my company, right? So we've reached out and reached out to her husband and spoken to her husband, in Tennessee, because again, she used to work under the same organization I did years ago. The gentleman that I work for actually knows her family very well. He lives in Brentwood, Tennessee, and so and she knows a lot of people we have in common. Now that's about as extreme today as you can get to. But again, just to be able to say, look, we have a lot of common ground. We came from the same place. We were trained in the same manner. I would love to kind of start to build a relationship with you. That's the way that we're doing it. I'm starting at the hardest.
And just one other thing, how would your insurance business be affected if what you desire to happen happens and there's a robust public option that people eventually say, why do we need these other insurers?
That's so funny. I almost have an opposite conflict of interest, right? If these kind of systems were put in place, and if we had a public option that took care of all medical bills, in one respect, my business would still do just fine, because the way my business works is it doesn't pay. We don't pay anything to doctors or hospitals. We pay people. So, for example, again, going back to my example earlier, let's say, Jonathan, you couldn't work for 6 months to a year because of something like cancer. Well, what our company does is it can pay in excess of $50,000 a month directly to your family that they can use for all those things we talked about. So in one respect, that may not be taken out. But if you really truly went to a public option where the government was responsible for helping with all those items, at some point it may put us out. We may become archaic. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what's going to benefit me the best. I've been involved in technology for years, and I've seen technologies that have changed over the years in companies like Kodak, Blockbuster, that have become obsolete. And that's just a part of growth. We all hate change, but we love change.
Are you an insurer or a broker?
I'm a broker of insurance, so it's not underwritten, but it's not, we don't underwrite our own insurance,
For
it's
other
underwritten by,
companies' products?
well, just one, I'm a captive agent. So we sell the Globe Life brand of products, and Globe Life has about 6 divisions. We're the family heritage division of that product line.
And that's a similar product that we might commonly know as a Aflac
Exactly.
product?
Yeah, except that ours have 100% return of premium, so people that buy our products, they actually, if they don't use them, believe it or not, they get every single dollar of their money back, which is very unique in the
Sold,
industry.
I'll take one.
We're gonna charge you for this time with our sales.
Right,
so
right.
that we- yeah.
Have either of you decided for whom you'll vote in the Democratic presidential primary?
Yes.
And who would that be?
Elizabeth Warren.
Why?
Nerdy girls rule. I feel that's really, I say that jokingly, but I really like the attention to detail in policy. I was a book nerd my entire life. I was never part of the popular crowd. And I love policy minutia. I love data. I love science. I love parsing studies. It's what I've done for my whole career. And it's very useful to have that decades of background when going into some of these discussions, because you can just say, here's what the data shows. You don't have to use your personal take or your emotion. You can say, here's what the data shows.
Any concern about her electability in November?
Of course not.
Dan, have you picked a favorite?
I'm
Or are you anti-nerdy girls?
no. Actually, one of the things that I love about Elizabeth Warren is the fact that she's nerdy. You know, I love the fact that, you know, people joke around about the fact that she always has a plan. There's a plan for this and a plan for that, and I love that. You know, it's exhausting to hear people say, "This is what I'm gonna do. Or I'm gonna figure this out," and to have somebody that says, "I've got a plan. I'm gonna work things in this manner to pay for this and do this." I love that. Plus, I think it's overdue to see a woman in the presidency.
So
I think.
you're voting for her in the primary?
Well, and let me give you the flip side, because I'm undecided. But the flip side of it is Bernie Sanders is one of the things I like about Bernie is that he hasn't changed what he said forever. You know,
And he's been alive forever. So
yeah, exactly, 78 years old or whatever. But it's interesting to me because right now single payer systems, things like that are becoming much more in vogue. But he was fighting for those things when they weren't in vogue, and you don't see him vacillating back and forth between what he said 20 years ago and today. And I really like that about him. I mean, I was a fan of his in the last election, but I'm still undecided.
So did you vote for him last time?
In the primary?
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, obviously, and Hillary in the general.
Let me ask about gun control and school safety and all that. So you'll be representing a district that probably likes guns.
Love their
probably,
guns.
Probably strong supporters of the Second Amendment. So how much gun regulation is too much? Like, where is the line for you? Or do you agree with Beto's "Hell yeah, I'm coming" or something else? Like, what would you be for? And if you could draw a line of, okay, yeah, I would not be for that.
Dan's first on this one because I answered first last time.
Sure. No, my thought on it is that, again, I believe everything evolves down a path, right? And I love Beto, but when you come in and you say, we're going to go from this extreme where all these freedoms, probably excessive freedoms, exist in gun control, to, okay, we're going to come and take all your guns, I think that you're asking too much of people. I mean, I don't know how that passes. I don't know how any of that makes sense, frankly. We've been working for years to find ways to, think about all the school shootings we've had, and you can't even get any real legislation on gun control besides bump stocks, right? So to me, I think it has to begin with saying, look, what is it that we know that we can really fight for now? And you look at what the populace has said. They've said overwhelmingly, look, background checks are something that should be deeper than they are now, and we're okay with that. And that's across the board. That's Republicans as well. You look at something like these private sales. The fact that somebody can go, my daughter could go out tomorrow, my 17-year-old, and she could go buy a gun from, she could buy a gun from you, and she didn't have to do a background check, doesn't need to be any paperwork on it. She can just buy it from you. Well, how do those private sale laws completely, how are they able to subvert the laws of a regular licensed gun dealer? And those are the kind of things that have to happen first. And I think that legislation, it's ready now. You just have to have people that are in there that aren't taking money from the gun lobby and aren't going to vote based on dollars that are being spent on them. But ultimately, if you look at assault-style weapons, I know people. I have lots of friends that go out in the lake and they shoot their AR-15s, and they have their old AKs and things like that. And the folks that have those are not going to give them up. But there's, I think, a couple of ways that you can start to regulate that. Number one is you say, look, if you're going to get a certain style of weapon, right, until it's a weapon that can be banned or is banned, you need to be licensed at a certain level to be able to have that. Beyond a background check, I think it's like driving a car. You have to have a license to be able to own that type of gun, and your responsibility falls on you. If somebody else gets their hand on that gun, you have to be held responsible for how that gun is used. And I think that's where it's going to start.
So I always go from my science and medical background. We're talking about a public health crisis, and that's a cliche. Everybody says that, and we know that. But if you look at it through that lens, then you recognize that it's not just about school shootings and homicides. That's a small portion of the gun deaths in the country, but you look at suicide deaths also. So I'm in favor of a reinstitution of the assault weapons ban. I was a Moms Demand Action designated candidate in the last cycle, so I've been strong on gun control since I ran the last time. I am also a gun owner, so I am not in favor of banning the Second Amendment and taking every single weapon off the street. I keep weapons for home security because it takes 25 minutes for the county to come out to my house when I have an emergency. So I'm sympathetic to that from a personal and from a level of thinking about other people. But we're not talking about just the 2% of deaths that come from assault weapons, which again, I'm in favor of a ban. We also have to look at, when we say universal background checks, it includes gun transfers. It's on all gun transfers, whether it's a private or a public sale. When we institute red flag laws, when we create longer waiting periods on gun acquisition, we know that gun suicides are the most deadly suicides. They're almost always fatal. But they're impulsive, and I know that from my medical background when talking to people who are depressed or who have PTSD or have anxiety, that they feel the need to get out of their immediate pain, and if they have a gun available, they can use that gun and be successful. So waiting periods for gun acquisition, raising the age of gun acquisition to 21. Did I say red flag laws? Red flag laws need to be instituted. We need to pass the Violence Against Women's Act.
Did you have guns in your home growing up, and have you ever had to use one for?
So I didn't have guns in my house growing up. The way that we ended up acquiring the guns that we have is that I was at home by myself late at night when my husband was far in South Austin, and my dog and I were home alone, and he went to the back door and he was just going nuts about something in the backyard. And I had no weapon at that point. I ended up sitting on my bed with a knife, a kitchen knife, hoping that there wasn't something going on in my backyard for that 25 minutes until the county sheriff's office made it to my house. And it turned out it was a rabbit in the backyard. So, but it was a very real issue for me at the time. Now, I juxtapose that with the fact that my son has been in lockdown at his high school, and I had to sit outside his school waiting to see if my son was going to be killed by a shooter. And so I'm not in favor, like I said, of banning all weapons, getting rid of the Second Amendment, but I do have weapons myself, and we acquired them after that. I haven't had to use them so far, but I practice them regularly.
Was the lockdown also a false
It was false, yes. It was at Leander High School a few years ago, and it ended up being a false alarm. It's no less terrifying when it's a false alarm.
Gun owner as well?
No, but I've got a really good compound bow.
Hey, you can come up to my house.
I would love to
Take
go.
it for the rabbit.
Come
Yeah,
shoot
yeah.
the deer.
Yes,
Oh,
sir.
you probably have them where you live too.
I do,
Yeah.
My,
okay.
my dogs keep
We
them
live
away.
very close to
Come
each
shoot the
other.
deer, there's a campaign slogan. You come to my neighborhood too.
But I get half the deer.
That's absolutely.
Okay.
I love deer sausage, by the way.
Are we in time?
Dan, I have one more because I think it tells voters a lot about a candidate. Two-man, four-man, driver, brakeman, or one of the two in the middle just along for the ride.
No,
Can't look at the scenery.
I was a two-man
I don't even
driver.
know what that
I was-
means.
it's for bobsledding.
Oh,
For bobsledding.
okay.
And I was the driver for about 10 years. Started in '98, right after the Nagano Olympics, and went till about 2007.
And what's the greatest achievement?
I had right around 9/11. My brakeman got real injured, and that was the year before the 2002 Olympics, and so I had to get a last-minute guy, and thankfully, bobsledding is like NASCAR. You have to gain a certain amount of points and finish a certain way to be able to qualify. And so to get a last-minute brakeman that worked with me that last year, they said there was no way we'd even make the Olympics. And we did. We ended up beating out, I think, 13 or 14 teams we weren't supposed to beat. We silver medaled when I got my brakeman back in the America's Cup the next year, and then unfortunately because of injury to me,
Excuse me.
bless you,
Thank you.
we weren't able to make the Torino Olympics. But yeah, I think that I'm going to tell you, it's kind of on the side. I think the greatest accomplishment that came from that was it opened up so many doors for me. I got a chance to go 3 different times. I was invited out to Monaco to go with Prince Albert. He was actually a bobsledder at the time, and he invited us up there, and we spent a week with him each time up there, which was amazing. And it just it opened up a lot of worlds to me that weren't available before. We got a chance to talk to the schools, meet with children. It was really cool.
For equal time, your bobsled or luge experience?
No, I can sort of ski, and that's about it. 2 skis, no snowboarding.
Were you representing Armenia?
I actually raced for both. In the Olympics, I was representing Armenia.
And so do you have dual citizenship, or did you not require it?
No, dual. Like I said, I'm first generation because both my sides of the family were, I guess, they were pushed out of Armenia. We were able to keep a lot of Armenians still have their dual citizenship.
So do you consider yourself an American or Armenian or a Texan?
No, well, first of all, I'm a proud Texan now. It took me 30 years to get here, but I got here as quickly as I could. But I was born in the U.S. I'm a proud American, but I love my Armenian heritage, and I love to talk about it. It's a very rich heritage, and it's just a great culture.
So that's what that accent is.
Very, very Californian.
Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you much.
Can I ask you a favor? And I'm sure you would love to as well. Is it possible to do a little bit of a closing with you guys, just to kind of wrap up some things? Do we have time, or are we out of time?
3 minutes.
Go.
Right.
I just, I want to say this. It's just interesting because I've loved this process, and it's been. I mean, I'm sure you guys can tell. Christine and I get along very well, and it's been that way with all the folks in the primary. We've got a really nice group, and I think we're going to be represented very, very well. And all of us have committed to helping out with whoever goes on to the next level of this. But one of the things that I've found in like the debates that we've been through and everything else is that there hasn't been a lot of talk about what we've looked for on a local level. All the questions have been national. And I wanted to share this because it came up a lot in individual conversations last night. And, I've mentioned a couple times, I've had the opportunity to sit down with so many folks, 18,000 plus just in the area. And it's funny because the things that you would think are so important to them, I mean, yeah, they care about all the things that we've talked about today, no question. But the things that really I have the most conversations on is they talk about the traffic that's starting to happen. What's going to happen with the growth in Texas 31? How's that going to affect me? I live down at the end of County Road 280, and they're talking about putting an apartment building in there, and how am I going to get out? I'm going to get stuck behind 40 cars every morning trying to leave. They talk about the internet and the fact that they're in rural areas and they don't have access to, spectrum cable because of the fact that it's just not wired properly. They talk about things like dog parks. The fact that they've got their dogs and they want, because that's a huge, it's especially probably more in Austin than even in our district. But these are things that come up all the time, and I will tell you, one of the things I've committed to everybody I've spoken to, I've said, look, these are things that I know on a day-to-day basis you're dealing with. They're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to keep their jobs because every time the market goes up, the price of a gallon of gas or a barrel of of oil affects so many of the folks in our district. And those are things that I've told them, and I want you guys to know as well. I'm absolutely committed that once I'm in that role, in a congressional role, that we're going to work on those local things, because I'm going to tell you, a lot of those things affect me personally as well, and they affect the people in the district. And we're representatives nationally, but we're also representatives locally. And I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot, and I want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in some of these interviews.
Close this up.
So I'm thrilled, first of all, to be here. Thank you guys for doing this. Y'all haven't done this before, if I'm correct. Is that right? All right. This is amazing. And I'm really happy that we're having a robust primary. We've got some good people who have come in with some good new ideas. The things that we've all been talking about, though, are things that I've been working on in this district for years, and laying the groundwork to be able to win. And that's what it all comes down to, is who has the groundwork laid, who has put a campaign together that can beat John Carter. And we have been working with multitudes of people on this specific issue for the entire time that I've been running, which is 3 years now, through the last campaign and this campaign. We've knocked on thousands of doors. I've made 15,000 fundraising phone calls already. This isn't something where we can just be gearing up as we start into after the primary. It's something that has had to have groundwork happen for the past several years. And I know this not just on an intellectual level, but based on the experiences that I've had working on a multitude of campaigns in this district. Every campaign that has been won by getting people out to knock on doors. It's an organizational skill that takes time to build, and my team has worked on Beto O'Rourke's team. And Michelle, one of my campaign staff here, was a field organizer in Georgetown for Beto O'Rourke. Lauda worked on Anise Parker's campaign in Houston. I'm worried that if we don't have those things in place, that we won't be able to flip the seat. And I urge everyone to be out knocking on doors now, yesterday, 3 months ago, so that we can get everyone to the polls that we need to. I urge everyone on every campaign to be a voter registrar, so that as we knock on these doors, we can register new voters. And it's going to take all of us working, regardless of who the nominee is. All of us have to be making those direct voter contacts to be able to win the race.